Uh, yeah, it started. Yeah, 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 yeah. You can start it right now. So the
Perfect.
recording has begun. Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Dinar. It's a pleasure to be here to talk to a lot of the folks from your side of the world. And then, secondly, I appreciate all of you guys dialing in on Saturday night in Pakistan. While here it's 11 a.m. on Saturday, which is a day for me, and it's a beautiful day in Dallas. But I'll get started, give you guys a little bit of my background, but let's make it fun. Fun, in other words,
Yeah.
do raise your hands or wave your hands if you have any questions as I go through it, because Gen AI, it's actually a very hot topic in the market, and there's lots happening in this space, and sort of being forefront um, in terms of delivering solutions for large enterprises, from mid to small to mid to large enterprises. More than happy to answer any questions as they come up. And then obviously we'll have a Q&A at the very end as well, but make it interactive. So with that, let me get started. I'll give you guys a little bit of background on who I am, where I come from, so that you have an idea about our experience and what is this all about. So I'm Nasir Mahmood. In the industry, people call me Nas. That's the nickname that I've got over the course of time. Um, I come from a military background. I spent close to 14 years in U.S. Department of Defense. I was recruited through college, worked for them to build intelligence systems around the world. I was fortunate enough to be selected as one of the subject matter expert on warfighting systems. Um, One of the things that's actually declassified that you guys can go Google at your own leisure is called TBMCS. At one point, I was a subject matter expert on that system where I used to train a lot of generals and colonels of the U.S. military on how to use those systems and how to execute battle strategies. So by purely virtue of working within the DoD realm, I got to dabble with data analytics, signal intelligence, and AI/ML early on. When I came out of military, I started my career in consulting. I got recruited by Accenture, which you all know and familiar with. I used to lead their alliance group, which is AABG, Accenture AWS Business Group, and I used to lead their solutions architect for North America. Fast forward, I ended up working for Deloitte, then AWS, and then from there I worked at PwC. At PwC, my role was strategy consultant, and I used to lead a practice called customer strategy, where we actually started that practice from zero to, I call it hero, if you will. We started with I mean, two buddies, and we built it up to 20 some odd folks plus, and then we grew from there. Uh, Fast forward, I did three startups along the way. This is my third startup that you guys are looking at, which is called AxeGenAI. I'll give you guys why I did this so that you have a good idea. So the concept of AxeGenAI is really a generative AI consulting. Um, and the idea really took a birth, if you will, of my own sort of doing in a consulting realm of things where I help a lot of folks figure out the complex solutions, or complex challenges and help solve those problems. One day we just sat across a bunch of partners in the firm and we just started talking about ideation exercise about how this pandemic has transformed and what's to come next. And in that conversation, there was a bit of confusion about about generative AI. And it dawned on me that there are some parallels in the industry that it's a good time to start helping people that need to understand generative AI to start building something, some solutions, some advisory services for those. Fast forward, we started back in November last year. We've grown to accumulate, I think at this point, we've got about two enterprise clients and about half a dozen small to mid-cap clients under AxeGenAI. The firm or the company AxeGenAI, we basically are a generative AI consulting company. And really what we do is we use generative AI to help improve business processes and increase ROI. That's really at a very high level. How do we do it? That's something we can explore as we continue to go through this deck. In addition to that, I mean, I spent a lot of time, as I said, when I came to consulting, a lot of cloud modernization. I've done hundreds of modernization projects along the way. As I was talking earlier before the recording started, I've gone around the world with the large corporations that are billion-dollar plus corporations to help them transform using advanced technologies such as cloud to modernize their ecosystem. Within the firm, I have obviously a team of experts. Um, Oh, that slide is not here, but I'll go through it. But some of my team of experts include one of my dear partner. His name is Gerard Verve. He's probably at the end, as you guys will see it as a probably a bio there, but he was a partner who hired me at PwC. He's got a 32 plus years of tenure at PwC to lead that. So when we built this company, I was fortunate enough to have him come in and as a strategic advisor to help us lead this firm. So let's talk about AI, right? Let's kind of you guys are probably I'm assuming you guys have kind of understood when Kareem Lakhani was on the call. He talked about some of the concept here, but I want to kind of take
Yeah.
a little bit of a deep dive into from a industry lenses, from a consulting lens, so you guys get a better idea of what he said on top of what I'm going to share with you guys. So when it comes to AI or generative AI, and we've actually witnessed four different waves. Obviously, you've heard wave one and two, and even to a certain extent, wave three. We, as sort of experts in the field, call this as the AI winter because although there were a lot of developments, but really nothing took off, right? It was purely basic stuff where we had cybernetics back in starting in 1940, 1970. Then we had trained experts, some of the trained experts, if you guys remember back in the days, is like there was a chess master. They used to play chess with the Google chess player. So those are again trained experts to beat other experts for specific domain. Then came the good learners space, which is the third wave, and this is where things got exciting, right? Reason things got exciting is this is where the augmentation started to take place. And what is, when it comes to generative AI, what is augmentation? You all are aware, but it has a profound impact on how we behave and how do we do business. Um, this was sort of the catalyst of bringing CNN and RNN, which is the convolutional neural network or regenerative neural networks, to more of the forefront of the humanity, if you will. This is where, if you use Google, Amazon, Netflix, and if you remember, where you get the description or prescribed sort of notion of, hey, this is what since you browse this or watch this movie, you might like this, right? So it kind of gives you, based on your likes and favorites, it gives you recommendation. And really, those are the RNNs and CNNs. At the heart of it, though, right? And since you all are an engineer working or kind of looking into this field, CNN are really to me, from a lens of a consultant, right? They're the crux of what AI is or generative AI is. And I'll talk about a little bit about what's the difference from a consulting lens of a traditional AI versus generative AI. But going back to the point, CNNs, right? These are neural networks. A human brain has about 82 billion neurons. When you look at ChatGPT-4, it has 1.76 trillion parameters. And the experts in the field say that the more complex the neural network is, the better the outcome. They're trying to mimic the human brain. And you guys are all aware of what CNN do in terms of the human capability, right? They mimic the human brain. So really that sort of kind of boosted our adoption to AI, but nothing happened during that time up until 2019 when the pandemic occurred. Pandemic is what actually sort of fast tracked and put a rocket booster behind everything we do today, the way we do it today. If you were to look at what happened before the pandemic, nobody actually had thought that we will actually be working from home full time, right? There was no notion of it. Matter of fact, it was always an exception that was made that if you needed to work from home, you had to go get an exception from your employer to say, I want to work from home, give me this exception, and they'll sign it off. But what pandemic highlighted and discovered or uncovered, if you will, was this notion of that we could use technology to work remotely. And that is what really brought the generative AI or AI into the normal or into the sort of the norm sphere. Now, all of you probably have kind of been reading on this. There's a key distinction between what AI is and what Gen AI is. And I say it like this. If you look at AI has to do with patterns and processes. It looks at the data, it's got a past historical trend, and then tries to figure out what's going to happen next, which is predictive, right? That's traditional AI. But generative AI is different because it creates something new, hence the word generative, right? So think of generative AI, like for instance, at the early phases, you guys have probably heard about cat in space, but let me kind of sort of break it down for you guys. When you talk to generative AI, early on when we started to conversate with generative AI, it didn't know what cat in space looked like. So if you were to ask Chat GPT, hey, give me a cat in space. It didn't know. But at the same token, you ask the same question, but before you ask that question, you upload space pictures and cat pictures and say, hey, tell me what does cat in space look like? And it can create that because it sees cats and it sees space, so it can create that. That is where really the art lies, that it gives it the sense of thinking, if you will, or sense of reasoning at some point, which obviously as we're getting there. But that's what was new. And early, I mean, obviously as we started with generative AI was contextually, now things have matured where there's a lot of diffusion models like Midjourney or that you could use to do rendering with. If you pair that with ChatGPT as a contextual to diffusion model to start to create some of the impressive artwork, right? Or the videos or the audios that you can kind of play around with. You guys have heard a story about the Rembrandt and how long it took them to kind of go figure it out. Now, Nasir or Nas being just an IT guy, I can go create a Rembrandt just using some prompts on a Midjourney, right? So think of the sort of it's what it's uncovering underneath it at the sort of broader or at the fringes of it is that it's making people or giving people the ability to explore the art of the possible. So if you're not a musician, you can write a composition. If you're not a doctor, you can understand what chemistry is, and you can understand the science behind virology. If you are not an artist, case in point, you can start to write or start to create art that has never been existed before. And it's these CNN and RNNs are the basic the building block where we were able to figure out the new proteins that haven't been discovered before. Why? Because if you, I was reading somewhere that a chat GPT has access to the entire internet, which is equivalent of 2 to the power of 17. That's about you and I reading 16 hours every day for 456 trillion years, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the ability, think of ChatGPT or any systems like it. I mean, we can go on and on. We can talk about ChatGPT, Midjourney, which is, I mean, then you talk about Hugging Face, Facebook Llamas, Google, Bard, Gemini. You have Cloud AI from an Anthropic, and it's just the beginning, right? All of these, think of them as your Einstein friends, right? These are your friends that you can use in your day-to-day life to ask and any question that you, I mean, as your digital friend or counselor to ask any question for your own sort of self-improvement. And it's being used. One of the Gartner studies indicated that by 2030, ChatGPT or the application like ChatGPT will be a companion of every employee in an organization up to 75%. So it kind of gives you an idea of how it's impacting the way the world is moving and how fast it's moving. Um, Let me go on to the next one. Now, picking that point back up on in terms of why it's important, why you should care about this. Um, if you and you might have, I don't know if Mr. Lakhani was able to kind of highlight this, but I really like, and that's why I use this, is because it really highlights the impact on the industry. So if you were to read back in the days, some of you might have read this as the longevity of an average enterprise corporation back in the early age when we had the Industrial Revolution was about 70 plus years. So in other words, an organization can survive for 70 some odd years, right? Back in 1800 and 1900s. Now let's talk about this, and I'll come back to that point as to why that matters. If you look at back in 1992, there was a bunch of ads that AT&T put together, and those ads were almost spot on. And you might have seen some of the videos that Mr. Lakhani probably had shared, where AT&T sort of predicted on point in terms of what the future holds. And if you do a quick Googling around, you'll see their approximation in terms of their value cap is about $121 billion. A lot of money, one would say. But look at the companies that actually took that idea and materialized it, like the companies of Apple, Google, and Amazon. So those of you that are outside of the US, these are the blue chip companies as we call them in the US. Why do we call them blue chip companies? Because there's solid stocks. And these are the companies that feed our 401k and pension plans. That like this is how critical they are to the infrastructure that we live, eat, and breathe. And they were able to actualize the ideas that AT&T envisioned and look at their value cap, look at their market cap in trillions. And that's just the beginning, right? And what did they, so what is the difference between AT&T and what is the difference between these companies? One, they're truly digital through and through. Secondly, they really understood the art of the possible and also understood the art of or the idea of dismantling silos within data, right? Because that's one of the big thing. One of the questions I've been asked when I go talk to a bunch of CEOs and CIOs across the table, they ask me, Naz, why do our AI implementation projects fail? And this is more of learning from a consulting realm of thing, from the industry side. And the answer to that is reason they fail is number one, what's important to AI or generative AI is data. So one, you got to have a clean data. You got to have data tagging, data classification. Well, therefore, you got to have a good data governance because garbage in, garbage out, right? So data is one. So you got the data, but then what else do you need? Well, then you need a solid infrastructure because if you don't have the right infrastructure, you can't survive in the race for the AI. Why? These large language models, as you guys are aware, they're compute intensive, power intensive, right? So to train the data, and let's say you got the data right, but your horsepower infrastructure isn't there, it's going to fail because that data just sits there because these machines that you're using are not compute intensive or they don't have enough horsepower to start really getting the insights out of that or compute that data to get the right insights. So these are the two important factors when you start to look at why it's important to have the right data and right infrastructure for a successful AI implementation. And who did this right? If you look at, I mean, there's examples, and one of the examples is Ant Financials, the Chinese company, right? They got this right. They serve 1.2 billion users. 1.2 billion users. If I didn't put that stat out there and I'd ask you guys, it's like, hey, how much of a workforce do you need to serve 1.2 billion users? The answers would be, oh, it probably 100,000, 200,000 workforce. But they do it less than 10,000 employees or close to 10,000, 11,000. Why? Thanks to AI. They really understood the art of digital, right? They have algorithms that are actually from the ingestion of the data all the way to the production and consumption of the data. They're using those algorithms. Um, and there was a good story around it is how did they figure it out? So Ant Financial used to be a PayPal for Alibaba. They used to do their, financial transactions. So when they gained the independence, as I call it, they figured out that they have merchant data and they have the consumer
Yeah.
data. So they said, oh, okay, let us figure out what's here and what's there. And then they started to map those data aspects to the demand. And how did they do that? Using large language model, using generative AI. And ironically, today, I mean, if you look at it, they have this truly an amazing rule. They call it 310. And I'll give you guys a little anecdote, but 310 is just 3 minutes supply. It's not 1 minute, by the way, it's 1 second to approve and zero human intervention. They can do that, again, thanks to AI, thanks to large language models. And even the US market, by the way, it's actually behind, right? So if you look at US market, I have banks that I go to, I do daily transactions, right? I go to the bank and I say, hey, I'm sorry I lost my card. Can you send it to me? I can call them too, or I can go to the bank, either way, right? They'll say, well, great, thank you very much. Appreciate you letting us know. Give us your name, give us your ID, blah, blah. Oh, by the way, it'll be there in the next 2 days, right? Here, that's not the case, or it'll be there next 14 days. Here, that's not the case. You can do all financial transaction with that rule. So it's changing the way we're doing business. But why does that matter? Again, you've already seen the impact on the companies of longevity. Um,
Yeah.
One is if you're not adapting to it, your longevity or your lifespan of your organization diminishes quite rapidly. So in today's world, I was reading somewhere on some of the research companies' data that they were talking about that if you're not actually interacting with Chat GPT or the generative AI, then longevity of your organization is about 7 to 10 years.
Yeah.
Think about the impact here, right? And the
Yeah.
other boom that you guys will see, and it's important here as well, is there's a couple of things that are happening. One is the Chat GPT itself is changing the behavior of average consumer. You and I included is, I mean, for the last about a year, I've actually, if I go back and I was thinking prior to this call here, is how many times have I gone and Googled? I can really count, right? Because I now use ChatGPT more than Google because if I go to Google, I'll have to click on all the links that I want. I have to read through all those links. I have to synthesize the data, summarize the data. I can go to ChatGPT and do it. And
Yeah.
but what it's doing, what it's changing is the consumer behavior. And the more
Yeah.
you get used to the leisure of, on the fly, in a second information, then you don't want to go back to the old ways of doing things. So now what they're doing is they're actually putting ChatGPT into the search engine, but nobody really is using that search engine as extensively as they were since the advent of ChatGPT. Another company called Perplexity came in the market, which basically beating Google in its own game, right? So, but there's tangents there in terms of like how and why. But when you do a search using Perplexity, it gives you source as opposed to ChatGPT, right? So, I mean, again, there's a lot of stuff happening in that space. It's impacting a lot of industries, a lot of companies. And the other thing that I mentioned at the bottom here is the cost innovation. One of the reason that you guys will see a lot of boom happening in the market is because every person that I meet or every enterprise that I talk to, they're all dabbling with ChatGPT. Yes, there's a firewall in terms because there's a concern about data security. And I've had a really interesting conversation with Microsoft, with AWS folks, and other industry guys in terms of how to secure data. And it's a phenomenal conversation that we'll discuss it probably as some other call. But the reason you'll see or you're seeing the AI boom is because every problem is being casted into AI. Case in point, you have a question, you have a challenge, where do you go? You don't go to Google anymore, you go to ChatGPT, right? And then once you start to interact and learn ChatGPT, all of a sudden a bulb goes on. It's like, oh, you know what? I can turn this into a custom chat bot or custom bot. And then when you do that, it's like, oh, I can actually go build a business out of it, right? So
Yeah,
now you're seeing a lot of boom happening in the market. I'll take a little
yeah.
pause. Any questions so far?
Yeah, yeah. So there are a couple of questions. And first, ChatGPT now has introduced the search as well. Yeah. So you
Yeah.
can, the way we traditionally we used to search on Google, we can do that on ChatGPT as well. So you talked about Ant in China, and since you are in US and you have been at the very cutting edge of all these large companies, because it's mostly concentrated in, obviously, in the large companies, the magnificent what it's called, the top seven: Tesla and Google, Apple, Microsoft, so on and so forth. And then we have the China. And here we are talking about, in terms of AI, you have the infrastructure layer, then you have the data layer. On top of it, you have the application layer. So you rightly pointed out, when it comes to data with China, it's lots of data, and they are very good in the application side as well. Now, when it comes to the frontier model, we see they do not have access to the cutting edge compute like the NVIDIA H100 or Blackwell or what and what not. How do you see China approaching to this predicament in terms of getting into the cutting edge infrastructure, which obviously I think they do not have right now?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of what I call perspective on that. And my perspective, I mean, what I'll start off with, there's a reason there's a contention between China and Taiwan because Taiwan has the cutting edge fabrication facility there and only serves Chinese as the Chinese population is growing and demand is growing, that they should have something on their own. The infrastructure, it could, if you were to look at, I mean, again, this is subjective view because I'm not the market sort of intelligence guy. But I can tell you from the industry, there was actually an interview between the TSMC chairman and the Intel guy on a 60-minute here. And one of the things that they pointed out related to what you were saying, and I'm just going to sort of paraphrase and extrapolate that learning to see, kind of give you the answer what you're looking for. For me, for Chinese to really replicate or being able to get the cutting infrastructure is to create enablement. And enablement meaning is they need to have the right sort of pieces together, talent, resource, materials, and then training. Once you start to do that, the rest will come. Um, and we all know how Chinese operate as well in terms of sort of the cutting edge technologies. But if you have those sort of critical pieces in place, I think it's just a matter of time.
Yeah, yeah, right. Makes sense.
Yeah. Um, So coming from a consulting background, what are the inhibitors in terms of transformation? Obviously, data silos, as we talked about, and the fact that with the Chat GPT or the advent of Chat GPT or the low code, no code, there's almost some of the sort of the jobs that are disappearing in the market. And the problem, it's a twofold. One is if you let the talent go just on the basis of that I can go Chat GPT it, that's not the right strategy because you don't know if you've never used the generative AI. First, you need to learn how to interact with it. Secondly, is if you take the data, it'll give you the data, but how do you validate that data if you don't have the experience and the insights? So there's that gap, and obviously the data silo is a good example, as I mentioned earlier about AT&T. AT&T had done everything right, but within their organization, everything was again a cost center, vertical cost center, and they'd never shared data because it was a company on its own, and that's what really kind of inhibited their growth. Um, but that's not to say that they can't be changed. And part of the transformation that I've done with large billion-dollar corporation is really address that challenge. And how do we do that is really through looking at what their operating model and business model is. In today's world, if you look at, it's no longer about just a traditional business model, but it's about using digital technology to embed that into your business model to start to create value and capture value, right? So as a consultant, when I go to any businesses, like I was with one of the client yesterday, we talked at length about this, is they asked me, it's like, Nas, how do we make sure that we have the right business model? Where do we start, right? And I tell you guys, I mean, I've spoken to a lot of people. The beginning of everything, yes, it's data, but it doesn't end there. You need to have what I call is the right education. I sat across a table with a CIO of a company up in Minneapolis without, I mean, it's not a public knowledge, so I won't disclose the name, but the guy asked me, he said, Nas, I spent about $5 million on upgrading my system, but I'm not seeing the ROI. I have top engineers, I have top, infrastructure. What am I missing? So I said, give me a couple of days. Let me look at, your landscape and figure out, the answer and come back to you. I did a little bit of research, did some interviews on the site, and come to find out, it wasn't actually the technology or it wasn't the people as well. But what was missing is the training piece. So you give people the greatest, the best tool, but if you don't train them as an engineer, if you're used to doing something, you're going to pivot back to the way of doing things the way you did instead of using new technology. So the enablement is very, very critical, right? You guys are all engineers in your own respective fields. If I bring you to do an automaker work, I mean, you won't know if I give you a wrench or a plug unless I teach you what's the most efficient way to do it. So it was a similar paradigm there, as where these engineers were great, but they just didn't know how to use that tool right or how to use the technology right. So they were actually pivoting back to the old ways of working. So he wasn't seeing the ROI. Sometime when you start getting into the fabric of the organization, understand their problem, sometimes what they tell you, or actually, I am adventurous enough to say most of the time, when they point you to a problem, that's not the problem. Problem is somewhere else. You just have to figure out how to get to that. And then that's why we're consultants, because we have solved problems. So business model, again, looking at how through and through you can bring digital mindset to that business model about value creation, value capture. In other words, if you're a company that aspires to provide excellent customer service, right? How do you capture that value? How do you write a value creation proposal for that particular service that you deliver? What you would want to do is then you want to create an excellent bot that actually delivers that service, right? So that's a value capture through that bot. So it's really kind of looking at your vision in terms of alignment of your vision of who you are, and then understanding where you're going with that to figure out, start to weave in the solution to help you digitize your business model. But the story doesn't end there, right? So there's an operating model too. Again, traditionally, there used to be only two factors of the operating model, which is scale and scope. There wasn't anything about learn, but it's important because, and I take a little bit of sort of pivot on this, like a slight digression too, is learning has to do with change management, right? Change is a skill that you have to actually put calories to acquire. It's not something that, oh, because the technology changes and process changes, I'll figure it out. No, it's actually something just like you go to learn your certification programs, or you go get a certification on machine learning, this, that, change is exactly that. You have to learn the change. You have to understand how to adapt to that change. And it's missing in corporate culture here because, again, we come from a traditional world. Generative AI is changing rapidly the way the businesses work. So we have to educate the customers. It's no longer about scale and scope, but it's about learning. It's about bringing that to bear to the average. And that's the point that I made earlier, is how do you capture value and how do you create value, right? It's about education. So that's a big piece. And I think you guys are at the core or the center of that as you're learning all of that stuff along the way. What we see, one of the thing that I want to mention here, I sat in the conference and I asked the question, I said, what's the impact of this? When do we see when we become sentient? Traditionalists like myself, I always thought that we're 50, 60, probably 100 years away. And that was my mindset, but the answers were shocking, right? These experts in the field talking about, oh, we're looking at transformation to being sentient in the next 2 decades, three max. That's 20 to 30 years, my friend, right? So are we prepared for that change? Are the organizations prepared for that change, right? And that's where all of you come into picture, where you understand this from an academia perspective, but then start to deploy that out in the field to understand where the shortcomings are in learning and improving. Because as new talent comes in, to me, when I see new talent, I see them as nimble. I see them as agile versus the traditional mindset, which is more waterfall. So that's going to be a sort of what I call a new frontier as we move to uncover the possibilities of AI. Any questions on this?
Yeah, audience, you can come off mic and you can ask question directly, or you can write your question in the chat. I can ask the question on behalf of you, whatever it's feasible, or you may ask the question end of the session when Nasir's once he's done. You can ask whatever it's feasible for you.
Okay, sure, sir. I do have one question.
Yeah, please go
In your
ahead.
previous slide, yeah, you mentioned that because we are facing this challenge right now, in which we have mentioned that uh, basically there are two challenges. The changing trends in AI are so fast-paced that either we give time to ourselves to adapt to the changing AI technology, right? Or we train ourselves. So we have to move very quickly in parallel. We are adapting to the new AI trends. For instance, you gave the example, now you're using ChatGPT instead of Google, right? So there are a lot of such stuff. We have GitHub Copilot, like tons of other stuff where we are transitioning from the conventional technology and using AI add-ons, right? So do you think uh, do we have to give ourselves time to adapt to these changes because the technology that we are using today is getting obsolete tomorrow? I'm like, it's adapting and improving so quickly that tomorrow there might be something new and we might be using some obsolete technology even in AI, right? So there we are facing this challenge. Either should we give ourselves time to adapt to these, or should we start training specific trainings and incorporating AI?
Very good
Yeah.
question, Omar. Love it. I think you all sort of answered your own question in a way, but I'll highlight that. The pace of innovation is so fast. Moore's law is taking effect. There's more than a billion transistor on a microchip. In terms of the learning itself, right? What I encourage people is learn the foundation because any solution that you build, like literally today, if you and I are working together building a solution, by the time we're done completing that solution, the technology has already changed. That's already dated, right? So you cannot keep up with the pace of the
Mm,
evolution. It's just fast. But what you can do is understand the foundation because the foundation is what gives you a grounding to know what the concepts are. You can then start to build on top of it. Case in point, as a consultant, when I go to company, let's say I've got a meeting planned on Monday to go do a workshop with somebody. It's a new business, a
mhm.
new challenge, right? For a consultant, because consultants always looking at sort of next challenges. That problem for that company, I've never seen it before in a sense where it's proprietary to that company. But if you look at it and kind of start to break it away, there's commonality across the entire spectrum of that problem with other industries and other clients, right? So it's all about
Yeah.
what I call the infer learning. So I take what I've learned from the past because I
Mhm.
have a solid foundation on trying to break it and trying to sort of build those sort of what I call of circles around and this problem fits here, this problem fits here because that's a common framework, and then start to figure out what the solution is. Why? Because again, as I said, I have foundation. So what I would encourage is understand the foundational elements of these technologies so that you
Okay.
can start to bolt on top of the learnings that you'll acquire along the way because it's almost impossible to keep pace with the technology evolution.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we have to set the expectations right, right? Because the organizations are they're trying to uh, keep themselves at par with this moving technology, right? But on the other hand, obviously the employees, the engineers, they all have to learn, and that learning space, unfortunately, and if I talk about this region, is a little bit slow than the rest of the world, right? So the expectations are high, but yes, the learning pace and the pace of adaptation to this new technology is very sort of out of sync. So organizations usually don't set the expectations right in this capacity.
Yeah, setting expectation is actually a key pivot or key pillar of when you deliver solutions or when you actually set some objectives or visions. You got to align the expectation. But at the same token, some of your portion of your question is that if you look at underdeveloped area, They just don't have the right infrastructure, right? So
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
number one is are there some enablements in place that allow them to then start to catch up on the technology? If not, that's the first thing I'd start working on, along with aligning the expectation that, yeah, we're going to start to lay the seed for this, and here's how long it's going to take us for us to adapt. But
mm-hmm.
without a doubt that we have to start today. That's something that, since you guys are all young engineers out in the field working in that, in those northern frontiers, is we have to set the right expectation, but we have to start today. Like if we haven't started, we're already late, right? And you have
Yeah,
the
yeah,
opportunity to be the catalyst. Most of you guys, I look at all of you, you are basically the trend of the future. You're setting trajectory of the new frontier. So coming up with ideas, saying, I want to do X, but then start to look at what's available and what's not, try to break it down and walk backwards, and then creating like measurable goals to get to that vision is very, very important. That's where you align
yeah.
your expectation and the expectation of the audience. But as I mentioned, again, you have to start. If you haven't started, start somewhere. And that is even ideation amongst yourself. I mean, you can form up a team of, 12, 15 students together, say, hey, I want
Mm-hmm.
to go, do this. And you can use Dinar as, I mean, obviously you guys do that, but as a coach and counselor, but you have to get involved. Without that involvement, if you expect that it's going to happen on its own, it's not going to happen.
Mhm.
Makes sense, makes sense. Thank you so much.
So this slide, I slightly covered in the other couple of slides in the previous chapter here, but to give you an idea, this is a bit of a consulting speak here. So it's something that you'll learn as what we talk about, in terms of parallels of the two different worlds. But this is more of a consulting slide, and it's important to understand why, so that you guys have a good understanding. When it comes to the adoption of generative AI, there's some parallels. I am traditionally, I mean, I come from as a military background. I was a network engineer, software developer, came an infrastructure guy, then started building, doing data intelligence, signal intelligence with DoD, came out, become a consultant. So I started cloud back in 2008, right? This was way early. But as I started the cloud, or working in the cloud, what I saw that there was always this hesitation for organizations or enterprises to adapt to it. And reason behind that was, again, security and governance. They just wasn't the enterprises weren't sure on, if I put my data on the, first of all, what is cloud? And then if I put my data on the cloud, is it secure? Right? And this is so important. What I'm about to mention now is, when these global solution providers came together and they solved that problem, which is the governance and security piece, the adoption rate went like literally tenfolds. Look at the stats there that I put there. 2010 is when they solved the problem. The market cap for cloud adoption was $58.6 billion. Look at what happened in 2015, from 58 to $178 billion. Why? Because they unlocked the value, right? They were able to figure out how to make sure the customers are at ease in terms of putting their data and trusting the cloud. Why it's important for generative AI? Because we're actually sitting at the same parallels. Today, as I mentioned earlier, as a part of the conversation that we've had, is why are organizations hesitant to use ChatGPT or the application like it, is because they're not certain about their data security, right? If I say, hey, I'm organization X and I want to use ChatGPT, how can you ensure me as an organization that my data is secure, that it's not going to go get leaked to public large language models and everybody can look at that data, right? And we're still building that for our customer here in the US, right? We're still teaching them. There's a lot of efforts around in terms of how we secure data. There's a lot of sort of unpacking there, and just in that sort of phrase. But if history is anything for us, I'm willing to bet that if we can solve that problem at some point, which we will, there's an estimate that by 2030, the market cap for just the revenue that's going to come from ChatGPT is over $1 trillion. That's more than the population of this planet. So then what I see is, I see you guys literally tapping into that market with the mindset of innovation to really bring that revenue in areas that you operate in. So it's so important, again, to start building that enablement. And it starts with education, starts with vision, starts with what are the foundational elements that you need. And it's, if you don't, you're going to be left behind because market is changing rapidly, right? So this is so important. So when I go to customers, as I mentioned, this is more of a consulting side, but I wanted to put it out there so you guys understand. When I go to customers and I share this idea with them, is that there's parallels. between what happened in the cloud and now what's happening in the generative AI. They get it because these companies operate in cloud. They've seen firsthand what it was back in 2010 timeframe when there was concern about is my data secure or not. They see it. So what are they looking at now? One of the biggest sort of thing that you'll see in the market in the US, primarily from a consulting perspective, is that you'll see a lot of initiative around the data governance, right? Why? Because data security, data tagging, data classification, all of that is preparing that organization for AI readiness, right? So once that is done and unlocked, which to me, again, being a consultant in the industry, I think in the next probably year to two, or even faster, if once that happens, the way we see the market today, you and I sitting across the border, uh, it's a complete shift. And today already, content development jobs have gone out the window. Low code, no code environments have taken out the developers. Matter of fact, Google just released that they're using AI to generate 25% of their code. So imagine what's going to happen in the pace of innovation if you stay Moore's law. I mean,
Yeah.
to with that and the principles. In the next 5 years, everything that you and I see will change.
Yeah.
CDO used to be a big C-level executive, chief data content officer. No longer. Why? Because ChatGPT. And that's the other thing is the organizations today, when it comes to real world implementation, which is really the topic of our conversation today, is they're having a hard time to understand, aside from making a conversation interface and talking with the data, aside from doing content summarization or content development or social media campaigns, they're not really using generative AI to the fullest extent it's possible. Why is because again, there's concerns on how to make sure that there's a security there. So once that is done, and you've already seen the job that it's actually taking out of the market, what do you think is going to happen 5 years from today once that is unlocked, right? we, if I today, you guys have probably used those tools as well. Like if I want to make a campaign video, all I need is, I mean, I can go to ChatGPT, generate a script. I go to this other sort of technology that's browser-based technology for AI. You can put your script in there; it'll generate a video for you with the characters in there, real-time video with 4K resolution. So do I need to then go to marketing company or even hire a marketing department? No. I mean, I could do the ChatGPT. So what's going to happen there? Right? So start to like understand the impact of it. Is that's what's important to understand. And I try to emphasize the fact that you guys, especially younger generation, where you guys are coming in and setting the trajectory of your future sort of endeavors, it's so important to understand the impact of generative AI and how it's impacting the real world. I look at you guys as catalyst, and I would emphasize again is start learning the foundational elements, right? Forget
Yeah.
about, there's one people ask me, hey, where do I start in terms of do I need to be a data scientist, an AI engineer? I say start understanding what AI is first.
Yeah.
There's a distinct feature between AI and AI. Understand that and then let your passion drive, right? You've got to
Yeah.
understand about data. Data is a foundational element. Then you got to understand infrastructure. But a person, one man can't do anything. One woman can't do anything. It's collective effort. So pick your passion, follow it, understand the foundational element, learn, and then grow from there because the impact of generative AI, it's unfolding in front of our eyes.
Yeah.
Any question?
So, yeah, so Nasir, my question is about the utility level. Let's say, based on the data, let's say I have my own proprietary data and I don't want to train it on a huge model like OpenAI 1.4 trillion parameter. I just need to have 100 million parameters. So, what's your take on the small language model in terms of value creation, particular to uh, particular to a use case like the use case I have. I may not go for OpenAI large language model. I can do it on any open source model. So what is your point of view in that regard? Where do you see small language model going forward?
That's an excellent question, Dinar. There's three answers to this, and I want to unpack it so that you guys understand the sort of the depth of why it's important for you to understand those three different facets. Number one is, in today's world, I mean, when you talk about a very highly nested large language models with trillions of parameters, you don't have to really worry about that today. Why? Because there's two methodologies called quantizing and pruning. Okay. It allows you to condense down your model without losing value with the margin of error about, 0.1, 0.2%. So just to say that, hey, my large language model has over 2 trillion parameters. Can I condense them down? If you do it right and you use those two methodologies, you don't have to worry about it. It's a light lift, right? So given that's happening in the market where, hey, look, I mean, I'm sort of looking at, light large language models and doing this. But the other piece is why wouldn't you use ChatGPT, right? This is the other facet of it. It's like you have ChatGPT. Matter of fact, you have other like Gemini, Bard, you have Anthropic AI. Why wouldn't you use those models? One is if you're going to build something on your own, it's going to take you a lot of time, one, to build it, second, to train it, and then a lot of money and compute power that goes into it because you've got a lot of power. So one, the shifting behavior is you got to build it. You better have a good talent, right? In terms of like, hey, I want to go start building even a small, light large language models, because it's sort of what I call nebulous today, given that those two methodologies that exist in the market. So I'm not really concerned about is my large language model has 2 trillion or 1 billion parameters. I'm looking at is what gives me the efficiency. And then I start to throw methodologies of pruning and quantizing to condense it down without losing value. But beyond that point, if I were to say, hey, look, if you look at what IBM Granite is doing, they're actually building large language models, right? And they're making it, they're all open source. They're making it publicly available where I can go and say, hey, I work in the regex industry, regenerative industry. I need a large language models. You can actually consume that model. They already have it trained. All you need to do is just subscribe to it, put your data, and off you go. Now, the other piece that you talked about, which is important, is the proprietary data, right? It's a it's a very interesting question that you ask because I mean I've been talking to a lot of clients around how to make sure that the data stays safe, because that's again biggest question and concern in the market. So to answer that, I mean, I want to give you guys a little bit of conceptual ideas. So stay with me here. Is if you really think that the data that you have is proprietary, then I venture out to say, can I not buy that data publicly, right? For instance, give you an example. With a healthcare client, I sat and they said my data within the healthcare is proprietary data. I said, okay, that healthcare data, I have 10 agencies that I can go buy that data from. And he agreed. He said, yes, yeah, you can buy this data. So I said, what makes it proprietary then? If I can buy this data publicly available sources, the data is not proprietary. He says, yes, you're right. But then he goes, well, the way we test it is proprietary. Then I say, okay, if testing is done, what methodology or ways that you use to test? And he said, we use A/B testing. I said, well, every engineer out there is aware of A/B testing. So it's not publicly available. Yes, it is. Okay, so if data isn't proprietary and the A/B testing is proprietary, then he says, oh, my large language model that I wrote is proprietary. Then I say, okay, what about, as I gave you an example, IBM Granite, the whole suite of it, I can buy large language models off the shelf. They're publicly available. Okay, so if I can buy the large language model publicly available, I can buy the data and I can implement the testing methodology. They're all publicly available. Then what is proprietary, right? It's not the single element in that equation that's proprietary. It's how you use them collectively to do what you need to do for your business, what makes it proprietary. And now coming back to your point is, how do you make sure the data stays safe? Let's say you and I agree that there's proprietary data, which there's always that proprietary data. Like again, RTX for a GPU that GPU and that TI builds, they have proprietary data around how they design. That design data is proprietary, right? So let's say we agree that you have proprietary data. To secure it, what I call, and again, I'll give you a little bit of example there is, um, think of three circles, right? Three literally circles that sort of, it's like a Venn diagram. They cross each other, but they're not really overlapping. So one circle is your organization, right? What you do is you take the proprietary data and you build metadata around it. So that's number one layer that you have. Then what you do is you take that metadata off your proprietary data and you blend it with the industry data. So if I'm in hospitality or oil and gas, or if I'm an accounting firm, I'm taking my core data, which is proprietary, building metadata, taking that metadata and exposing that and throwing that into the industry data. Now I have some relevance of my organization in the space of industry data where I can interact with these large language models to extrapolate. But then let's go a step further. Well, I want to completely make sure that it's secure. Then what you do is you take the industry data that you build off of your metadata, and then you put that into the public data, right? Now you have three layers to abstract from. because you have built metadata, you have built whatever encryption models that you have to then send it through all the way down. Now, can you trace it? If you can trace the signature of a HTTP handshake or a transaction over or TLS or whatever the case is, yeah, sure, maybe there's a way to figure it out, but it requires a lot of compute power. But what that gives you is the ability to take your data that's camouflaged in the realm of open source. So you can interact with models like ChatGPT, with models like Gemini, with models like Perplexity, with models like Llama, with models like Cloud AI. Why it's important, right? And to just to complete the answer to that, here's the other thing that you need to start to think about. So I sit across a lot of CIOs, CEOs, and they ask me this question is about the security because that's one of the biggest thing. I say, look, if I ask you a question of where's the biggest economy in the world that operates today? It's not China, it's not US. Where is it? It's internet, right? Internet is the biggest economy. Why? Because all of us, we're connected through internet, right? We're sharing our insights through internet. We transact through internet. We pay, we buy, we eat. You have obviously, the technologies like Uber Eats that you guys are familiar with, probably not there, but you have Careem there or something like that. But it's all, again, we're transacting on the internet. So internet is the biggest economy. Yes, Nas, that's a great point. So if the internet is the biggest economy, where do you think, why do you think we call the biggest economy? Is because a lot of foot traffic, right? Because that's what makes the economy. Yes. So everybody's going to where? To the biggest economy on the internet. Okay, cool. So we agree that the user base makes the biggest economy and therefore the internet's biggest economy. If that's the case, where is the shift happening today? You and I, we already established the fact that today, when I want to go Google, I'm not going to go to Google because why do I have to go pull up link, read, summarize, synthesize, and then pull data? I can go to ChatGPT and ask question, boom, I have the data. So user expectation and behavior is changing. They're all going to the ChatGPT. They're asking questions. So moment of thought here is that if, let's say there's a trillion population, which is not obviously, but they're all interacting to ChatGPT on the biggest economy in the world, and you putting a firewall between you and your organization, maybe you'll exist for another 2 years. But if the open source model don't know about your company because users aren't talking to the large language model to understand what you do, who you are, your existence is irrelevant. You're going to disappear in the next 2, 3 years. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah. Ibad, can you please come off your mic and ask the question directly? So you have put your question on the chat, but you can ask it directly from Nasir.
Sure, why not? Hey, Nasir, how are you?
Hey, how you doing?
Yeah, thanks for the amazing input. Just have a quick question on the topic of data. Uh, you talked about creating a much more aggregated data set by combining your metadata with an industry data set and then combining both of these with publicly available data sets and then, interacting with large language models using these data sets, using this process of creating a three-layer or multiple layer aggregated data set creation, right?
Yeah.
So, we've seen that synthetic data is a term that organizations in the industry has started using as well. So would it? So essentially, the question becomes that if I use my own proprietary data, an organization takes its proprietary data, and based on the proprietary data that it has, it creates synthetic data that is a reflection of its own proprietary data and create a much larger data set so that the models, the LLMs can interact with the data, synthetic data, and the proprietary data together. Would this is this a better approach of how organizations should use data, or should they use multiple aggregated data sets like the one you mentioned?
So it depends on the nature of the client's data banks, right? A lot of I mean, there's it's called, I believe it's called data rooms that Amazon came up with. The concept is that, a bunch of data consumers come in and dump their data in, and then only people that actually are the admin that have access to the full data, but then they do this sort of cleansing and put metadata around it to share across, so no one can actually really pull the data because they keep the silos, right? But it's so question. I mean, to answer your question about the synthetic data, it really depends. It depends on the client nature of business that you do. But at the same token, as I mentioned earlier, is if you truly want to explore the art of the possible, in other words, if you're looking at organization X that's using synthetic data, or actually it's not, even if you go beyond, like let's even take a step back a little bit. Let's say if they're not doing anything with ChatGPT, they're not putting their synthetic data out in the realm of things, but where's the innovation, right? If I'm an X and you're Y, and we're actually competing in the same industry, we have, like as I mentioned, if you put the data together, we're in the chemistry, we're discovering new forms of proteins. Take that same learning or same principle is you have a data, I have a data. You and I would never share that data. We'll never figure out what is that we can combinedly build or control or come up with in terms of the innovation. So the innovation goes out the window because you're already looking at competing. You just, sort of what I call is unintentionally, you're being myopic and one-dimensional, right? So I would encourage organizations in this space to say, hey, look, use synthetic data to collaborate because it brings the art of the possible, it brings innovation. Is that a sort of a approach that everybody uses? It's debatable, right? Because if you talk to highly regulated, for instance, if you look at the public sector, and I'm going to drive a little bit deeper into, you look at federal space, for instance, versus commercial space, right? There's a clear divide here. You'll never see, the data sort of being transposed between these two industries where you have commercial industry and a federal industry because a lot of regulations, right? And it's highly regulated, and obviously for all the right reasons, because government data, as you all know, it's got some obviously stuff that can be shared publicly. But at the same token, there's elements of it is that coming from the military, there's elements of that data that we actually use metadata to then cross-pollinate with the public data to understand the sentiment, right? And that learning only
Right.
happens if you start to collaborate. So if you stay in the realm of, hey, my organization is proprietary, I'll never do this, perhaps you'll survive, but it's not going to be long, right? Because we live
Right.
in today, as I mentioned earlier, the world we live in, you go back, right? We lived in world where we had borders. Today we live in borderless world. Why? We're all global citizens. You're talking to me in Dallas while you're sitting somewhere in northern areas, perhaps, or in even
Yeah.
Islamabad or Pakistan somewhere. There's no borders between us. Well, you and I were talking, we're chatting in real time, right? So it's a connected economy. What does that tell you? The element of that is that we need to start to look at how do we bring that collective economy together through the very facets of what powers the AI, which is data, because data gives us insight. So how do we share that data so we're not only focused on the competition of each other, but the innovation piece? And it won't happen until we start to collaborate. I hope that answers it.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
does. It does. Yeah, essentially, my question, it got answered, and I think the answer lies in specific business cases, because as I understood, a lot of these organizations they're a bit hesitant while sharing their data. So
Yeah.
that's why
Yeah.
I asked the question. But thanks for answering.
Yeah, no,
Great
no
answer.
worries. Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, again, like the reluctance for them to share data, it's all for the right reasons I mentioned. We're still on the slide is
Yeah,
that, there's that concern about is my data secure? The education is what's important. Guys like you would come in and start to educate these people to say, hey, your data is secure, man. I mean, we're like, it's your data. Nobody's taking that data, but what they're doing it is we're learning from your data, from their data. Your organization is learning from their data. Their organization is learning from your data. You still own the secret sauce. Because remember, as I mentioned, is it's not about using the large language model that's proprietary. It's not about using data that's proprietary. It's not about using testing methodology that are proprietary. It's actually putting that equation together collectively and how to use that to serve your client base and your business and improve the ROIs overall for your business is what makes it proprietary, right? In other words, I mean, I can go to an auto shop and you guys are well familiar with this concept. I can pick up pieces and build a car. Does that make it proprietary? But if you go to Toyota, they'll say, well, this wheel design is our proprietary. Yes. Why? Because that design itself is proprietary, but the pieces and parts that come in, it's not. So what makes it
they're
proprietary is,
not.
again, it's the full equation of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah. Yeah, so Ilyas has the question he has written in the chat, but if Ilyas, please correct me if I'm not getting it right. So he's basically asking about the shift, like there was from PC to from server to the cloud to mobile and now to AI. So the way the technology platform shift, it kind of the mindset of the organization also shift. So how to adopt in a shift of technological platform, which is so abrupt, so quick. So how to keep in order to win in order to keep the pace or win the race. What's your take on it?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I think his question is around that. And
yeah,
if I'm wrong, please correct me.
yeah. No, no, that's an excellent question, and that's a question I have to answer myself too, being a consultant in the industry, right? Because as I mentioned, for me, every day is a new day. As a consultant, I go to a client every day of the week. I see a different problem. And every day of the week, I see different approaches to solve that problem, and be it a tool, be it a methodology, right? So, to answer that question, I mean, look, I mean, it's you do what's possible, and that is the education. The fundamental is the education, right? Is no, number one, I actually did a workshop with a bunch of guys, and I said, "Hey, look, the one thing that you really want to focus on, and I use a little bit of sort of out of the whim words there too, but nonetheless, is what you want to focus on is find your purpose because the purpose will drive your passion, and that passion will take you far long than the other way around." Right? Number one is really to figure out what your purpose in this life and world and the community and the sort of the career and the family that you have. If you can find that purpose, that'll drive you toward where you need to go, right? Then you can start to lay the foundation for that. The pace of innovation is so disruptive that it's humanly impossible for you as a person to stay up to date. You cannot. I mean, how would you do a value add for a corporation if you're always looking at the internet looking for what's new, right? You can't really focus on doing any value work. So what I recommend is learn the foundation. In other words, learn what makes generative AI differentiated. What is generative AI and what is AI? Understand the concept, understand the basics. Rest, you'll start to bolt on. As a consultant coming in the industry for 20 some odd years, what really helped me to stay up to pace is not because, oh, I'm basically spending 18 hours a day in a basement to learn about what to know. For me, it's more about I understand the new technology coming in, I understand the concept because I have the foundational element, and then I start to look at from a lens of how I do bolt on what I know already as a foundational element to figure out how does this applies to this problem, this problem, and then try to bring that. And then the other thing, look, one other thing that I'll tell you guys, and I teach all of my counselees is I tell my consultants that report up to me is you as a person not are is and are not the answer to everything. So when you're in the force work or workforce rather, never get into a pigeonhole where you feel like, oh, I'm the answer to everything. Because as a human, you cannot know everything. It's the collective team that makes up that answer, right? It's where you can rely on your buddies, coworkers, because you have a certain specialty and they have a certain specialty. So bring it down to your purpose, bring it down to your aspiration and vision, and then just follow that. Because trust me, once you do that, there's no stopping.
Yeah. Yeah, so my next question is about the productivity gain out of AI. Yeah, so recently I visited some farmers in two or three counties in Wisconsin, and I was kind of shocked and bewildered to know that there was a farmer holding up to 500 acres of land. 500 acres of land is way too much, and I thought he must be employing, let's say, 100 people or maybe 50 people, 70 people. He was growing corn, he was growing sorghum and wheat, things like that. He was a large farmer. 500 acres of land is way too much. And 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 his farm was, yeah, kind of mechanized, and there was too many technological tool. And when I asked him how many people you have employed in order to manage this particular farm, which is of 500 acres, he said only three people.
Yeah.
So obviously we see the productivity gain, but then we have to look into the societal aspect as well. Where do you see this disruption in generative AI or whatever it sees? Though we see the revolution in language models, things like that, but soon we are going to have agents, soon we are going to have robotics, things like that. So
Yes.
where you see the coexistence robots and this AI versus the human being, what's your take on it?
Excellent question, Dinar. Excellent question. And I've been asked this question multiple times. And there's actually, I'll start with this. There's a beautiful article that MIT wrote. It's called Deadless. I'd love for you guys to read it and probably share, ask me after our call, and I'll look for and share a link. But here's the beautiful thing, right? One is you always got to be optimistic about the technology. I mean, if we start to digress into the negative side of, and the impact of that negative side to the humanity, we'll never come out of depression, right? Because the technology will disrupt. As a business, it's only right if I deploy technology to offset my, technical debt or human debt, right? So I want to automate a lot of stuff to, again, increase my bottom line. So you can't blame the businesses. They're in the business to earn revenue, earn profits. So they're going to deploy that. Now, the debt list talks about this thing because there's a balance that we need to create. So as innovator, as inventor or innovation in AI space, we are the catalyst. We're the sort of the pioneer that are developing it, but we need to keep a balance in there where we have to figure out where do we bring in the automation, where do we do augmentation, right? The augmentation is where you and I have a bargaining chip. Why? Because within the augmentation paradigm, we can only, you can augment me for mundane tasks, right? But you're not fully taking me out of the picture as a worker. I'm still employed, I still earn. And so the impact is less. Although there's going to be a lot more efficiencies because of the automation, I no longer have to do the mundane tasks, so I can focus on business value add. But when it comes to automation, and that's where I see it's going, it's disruptive. That's where you and I, as a worker, lose the bargaining chip. So where the market will go, time will tell. I mean, nobody's got a crystal ball, but the trends obviously see toward automation, and it has a disruptive impact to it. But one thing that we all can do, and I encourage everybody that I talk to, or a bunch of the audience that I've actually entertained in the past, is get involved. Get involved in the making of how this thing is rolling out in the industry, right? As a business, I mean, if you're not going to get involved, then be good at what you do. Learn what you do so the AI can't replace you, right? And
Yeah.
one more thing, you might have heard this from Mr. Lutani as well, is it's not the AI that'll replace, it's people with AI skill will replace people with non-AI skill. So
Yeah.
either you start learning or start getting involved in where these decisions are made. And people come to me, well, how do I get involved in decisions? And I was like, well, there's a lot of organizations that actually are publicly open for you to join. Like, for instance, there's an organization called UNUG, ONUG. Their whole purpose is that they sit in the middle between a consumer and a supplier or a product manufacturer. They take consumers' input, distill it down through academia, a lot of the experts, and then go to the vendor to say, hey, you building this product, make sure you take this feedback from the public and embed that into the chipset so that it's doing what it's doing based on the public asking expectations and experience. They do that to balance the supply and demand, and also they do that to create the balance between automation and augmentation. So get involved. If you don't want to get involved and you're what I call is introvert personality, then be good at what you do so that those things cannot be replaced because disruption is inevitable.
Yeah, yeah, makes sense. So guys, any question, please, if you have any question, you can ask. So we are all already 1 hour past 18 minutes. So yeah, if
I'll quickly
if you
run through.
have,
If you want me to run through, we can stop here. It's up to you. I mean, I covered some of these topics as well. What is Gen AI?
yeah,
What
yeah,
is, yeah.
yeah,
Um,
you can, please.
okay. So, I mean, again, just as I mentioned earlier about the 456 trillion years takes for a human to read through it, the key distinction that you got to remember is, again, Gen AI is you create something new. AI is traditional, whereas pattern based. But one of the key distinction between generative AI or if you call it the human brain augmentation, if you will, is that the large language models are, I mean, again, they're neural networks, right? Um, if you look at human brain or human anatomy in terms in their brain, is the human brain is wired to either fire neurons or not fire, right? But when you get into the realm of the large language models, and it's a beautiful thing, but it's very disruptive too, is that you can turn the knobs and dials to fire either 10%, 20%, not at all, or 100%. And it's so important, although it's a very minute aspect, but it's so important to understand the impact of this is because right now it's uncovering a new dimension that we never have explored versus human brains. So it's going to become more efficient than human brain, in other words, right? Because our neurons either they fire to give us go or they don't fire, so we still stay still. But these things can operate in the middle. They can operate at a certain capacity, full capacity, or no capacity at all. And that is a key distinction between large language models versus human brains. And as I mentioned earlier, the more complex the large language models are, the better the outcome is versus the human brain. Digital transformation journey, we talked about this earlier too, but typically this is again in the consulting slide, it's when we get involved with our clients. Uh, if you want to win businesses and you want to chart this path and you want to sort of explore, hey, I want to be a consultant, you need to understand that you are playing an advisor role for the customer. In other words, you're with them, you're going with them, you're seeing their pains, you're learning from them, you're helping them, you're being their trusted advisor. So there's a journey map, and this is what that journey map is. And reason again, this slide is more about AxeGenAI, so that our customer can see value in terms of how we deliver our engagements and projects. But to you guys, since aside from the consulting spiel, is that always think of, if you want to go and make something out of your life and make something big in the careers that you have, start to become the trusted advisor of a customer. Because as a consultant, I can tell you in the industry is, there's a dime a dozen people out there that can say, hey, I'm the best expert, I can solve that problem. Sure, I mean, they might even deploy you, pay you to do it, but it's only going to be one time, and the money isn't made in one time. It's a repetitive business. To get that repetitive business, you have to be a trusted advisor. What that means is you have to be there with them when they have a pain, when they are growing, when they're not growing, when there's issues. You got to be there, and that's, as a consultant, what we do. We're there for them to understand, so they can call upon us to say, I'm running into this issue. How do I get out of it? Tell me, what tools and technology methodology can solve a problem. So really, start to build a journey map. I mean, a journey map is important. What they say, and this is very profound thinking, is if you don't have your vision charted, somebody else will write your destiny, and you're gonna have to live with it. Which one should you rather do? Would you rather write your own destiny or have somebody else write it? And I'm always of the opinion is that you should chart and write your own destiny. So that's a journey. Real world implementation we talked about. I mean, I have a lot of good friends and network here in the medical industry. We've done a lot of engagements with those guys in terms of personalized healthcare, disease diagnosis, mental health care. There's a bunch of bots out there that use that technology. I mean, a bunch of bots that allow these industry professionals to get help and seek help through some of the new innovation or innovative technology solutions. Um, Workforce optimization, we talked about how the generative AI is disrupting, right? There's a bunch of stuff out there. More than happy to take any questions and answer after the call or even once we hang up. But this space right here is being disruptive, extremely disruptive, right? As I mentioned, is people with AI skill were replaced with non-AI. It's so important, right? Very, very important. Think of it this, like today, you can hire me as a average worker who's going to come in and take a shovel and start to dig a hole. I have a lot of elbow grease to spend, but at the end of the day, you're going to give me, let's say, $50. But a worker that you hire who actually can operate a crane, dig a hole, you're going to pay him much more. Why? Because he's using a new technology. He's more efficient. The same principle applies to you guys. Learn AI so you have skills that can keep you relevant. Um, Potential risks, we kind of highlighted some of the risk as well. I mean, I get questions about autonomous military bots. I mean, that's another conversation we can talk about. There's a lot of ethical hallucination is very important, right? Um, and this hallucination, if you understand this, is basically what it does is if you ask ChatGPT and you're not an expert in that field, it'll give you some data that's nonsensical, but you'll believe it because it says with such a conviction and with such a eloquent writing that you'll be like, oh, that's true. Like, for instance, there was a joke that, there's a video segment called 60 Minute. By the way, 60 Minute is a video segment that all corporate echelon watches, right? And in that, they were kind of going over AI marathon. They talked about, there was a AI made a joke to its user. It said, hey, the half the Antarctic ice is made out of penguin urine. And when they'd actually a fact check, it's like penguin don't urine. They don't. So, but ChatGPT said and they believed it. So there's a lot of hallucination. In terms of bias, I say this, right? If you look at the industry and where the industry going, I don't think people are spending enough calories to really classify their data right. It's not the AI that's biased. It's the data. If the data is not the representative full demographics, AI is just a projection of what's in the data. So it's going to be biased, right? So you have to really work on the data. And then again, one of the big risks that you'll see that's going to hit the masses. It's not just hallucination or bias. It's actually the propaganda, fake news is. Because you and I can sit here and literally there's no stopping us. There's no force that's telling us not to do anything. We can create fake news, make it look like real. And what that's gonna do is actually there's always an aspect of people getting inundated with overwhelming content, and all you're doing is adding more to that, right? And what does that do? It makes you as a person incapable of deciding what's right and what's right because you're overwhelmed with the information you have. It's called analysis paralysis. So that's the other impact you'll see. But the more you'll learn about this, the more you're aware, and the awareness is what's gonna prevail. Other than
Yeah.
that, with that, I thank you all for listening to my spiel. I mean, I'm happy to take any questions that you guys have.
Yeah. Yeah, Ibad, please go ahead.
Okay, thanks. Thanks a lot, Nasir. Wonderful session from hearing from you. So much explanation, and one of the very few sessions where I enjoyed you explaining each point in detail. Amazing knowledge. So, one of the questions that I have, and maybe you can answer it in two parts. Uh, I've been studying AI for some time and understanding the industry trends, and I've found something very interesting. AI has been around for quite a long time, but kind of like the boom was when OpenAI released their Chat GPT models, especially the GPT-3 in
Yeah,
November of 2022.
yeah,
After that, we saw a boom in the overall industry. A lot of products, SaaS-based products, and different unique products catering to different problems. Right, wherever generative AI can be filled in, people develop small products, and we saw a lot of companies coming out of not only the US, all over the globe, primarily the US. But we saw that these products, these so when ChatGPT 3 and 3.5 Turbo were released, people thought to themselves, okay, this is interesting. This LLM is interesting. So why don't we connect multiple LLMs and make them do different tasks, right? So a lot of different pre-agent companies and products were built. But then later that year, OpenAI released the agents infrastructure all in itself. So for OpenAI, it was just a functionality and a lot of different products. And those products were developed into product-based startups or companies found themselves in a very limbo mode where they didn't know what to do anymore, right?
right, right,
So, and we see that these infrastructure companies like Google or OpenAI and these big companies, right, with a lot of sheer resources and hardware and compute, a lot of the functionalities that they've been adding into their products, like reasoning, uh, these functionalities are basically functionalities for these infrastructure companies, but before they launch them as functionalities, they are as product ideas for different companies. So in a landscape where it's so much tricky and maybe a company invests a lot of time into developing a product based on a loophole that they find in a system, that loophole is just simply a functionality for the infrastructure companies. And when that functionality is launched, these companies suffer. So how do you navigate in such a complex and uncertain environment, especially in the AI's realm that we're seeing right now?
yeah. No, that's an excellent question, Bob. I'll start like this. Look, when Tesla formed and built his company, he didn't say, "Oh, there's Ford out there, there's Toyota out there. I'm not going to go build it because I'm just looking for a loophole." That's not how you want to start a company. That's not the charter, right? That shouldn't be the charter. Um,
Right.
Case in point, on the flip side, I met a guy up in Morocco when I was traveling who actually sold that like function to WhatsApp, who became a millionaire. It was just a loophole. It didn't allow them to click on like and that thumb tags, all the emojis, right? He sold that to
Right.
WhatsApp and made millions out of it. Now, again, like we can argue this six ways from Sunday, which is it going here. But the fact of the matter is that those companies have a lot of power, a lot of money, and they will figure out. But you shouldn't be worried about that. Just like Tesla. What I encourage you
Right.
guys to do is have a focus on the vision that you want to build. Even let's say if it's a loophole for them and they have the power and the money and the time and the material and everybody else, it's far easier for them to go find somebody who's actually doing it and buy it. You still walk away win-win, right? You can sell it to
Right.
them. Or, for instance, if they build it, well, you've already done it way before they could. That gives you a runway to then innovate on top of what you've already done. And just like Tesla, right? He built his car. He could have said, "Oh, I'm just going to go talk to Ford and give them, hey, put electric engine in there or electric, apparatuses in there." He didn't. He said, "I'm going to go build it. I'm going to do it like this," and he did it. Same thing to you is when you start to figure out those loopholes and start to build products around the loopholes, as you start to roll those things out, don't worry about, oh, they're going to figure it out. You want them to figure it out. One is it gives you a buying, it puts you on top anyway, because you're going to make the headlines. Hey, this company already figured it out. This product actually fits that. They can come and buy you for, multi-million dollar deal, or say, hey, I'm not going to sell it. You go build your own, and they very well can, but but your thought process, your ingenuity, they can't copy, right?
Right.
You are
True.
unique, and they could have 2,000 engineers working on it, but they're not going to say, "Oh, this is Ibad," because Ibad has a different vision, right? Ibad has a different sort of charter, and he's got a different mentality, so they can't copy
Right.
that. So I wouldn't worry about that piece. I would focus on what is it that I'm doing, what's the vision, and where am I going with it. That's very, very important. And one of the key thing early on when I was in the startup, when I sort of started dabbling with startup, one of the key advice that I was given is they said, don't worry about the competition. That's what Amazon did. They weren't worried about competition. I'll give you a story, and it's a digression, but it's important. At Amazon, when they actually started off and they had a Barnes and Noble, they were selling books. And there was a time where Barnes and Noble used to put weird ads for Amazon, and Amazon employees would be scared. So the parents of Amazon employees would call Jeff Bezos to say, hey, I want to make sure my kids is okay because of the ads. But his push is don't worry about what they're saying, right? Focus on the innovation, focus on your customer. Because if you look at competition, okay, fine. Let's say you have the ingenuity and you beat the competition, but then what's next, right? Are you done there? Because you already met the competition. But if you focus on the customer, they will always challenge you that what you've given me isn't enough. And what that means is you'll
True.
always be on your toes to innovate. So focus there, focus on what your ingenuity is. You're unique. The fact that you're thinking this lens makes you unique. There's a lot of solutions. I mean, I built several apps. When I started off in the industry, I built several apps, but those apps are now part of the feature that they do. Was I wrong? No. But I did what I did and I was ahead of their times. That gives me edge, just like you. So take that vision, move it forward, build on top of it, because the innovation is really the art of the possibility. And your mindset, they can't steal that. They can
Right.
they can plug the loopholes, but the innovation and the vision that you have, they can't copy that.
Yeah. Yeah, so there is a question in the chat. It's from Faizan, and basically what he's trying to understand is obviously when we are training the large language model and we are giving it reward, what's called a reinforcement learning from human feedback. I think, but obviously whatever services or product, it's for the customer. So input, output, in if, the data we are getting in and the feedback and the running it on the model and then producing the output. And then there is the question of trustworthiness and hallucination, which you talked about. So how to gain the customers or client, whoever they are, their confidence, because there may be fake stuff that your model is producing. There may be your models may be making things up, things like that. So I believe his question is on those lines.
Got it.
What's your
Got
take
it.
on it?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. Spot on in terms of the learning behavior of a neural network, because that's what powers large language models. There's this thing called gradient descent. That's a learning methodology that these models use. In other words, there's a bunch of knobs and dials. So let's say if you were to take a picture, you tag it as cat. What they do is they break that into pixels, millions of different pixels, make them fuzzy, process them through a bunch of different knobs. Those knobs turn left and right. They open up, and once they get to on the other side, they get the right image, they get a feedback saying yes. And that's what the gradient descent learning model is, where it goes back to say, yep, you got it right. So they improve upon it. Now, why I mentioned that it's important is because to exactly what you said is how do you counter that if the data is not right? And the answer lies exactly there. Get the data right. Put the right data governance. Classify data. Cleanse that data. Tag that data. Put security around that data so it's tampered proof. The more you start to, guys, I mean, as I mentioned before, I mean, it's sort of like a relevant question in the same lines is when people talk about AI as biased. I could argue all day today, AI is not biased. AI is a program that's written to project what's in that data. If the data is biased, then the AI is absolutely biased, but it's not the AI. It's the data that makes it AI biased. Same thing here is if the
Yeah.
data isn't cleansed, you're going to have hallucination, right? You're going to have all those problems that you just mentioned. But if the data is cleansed and you have the right data governance, you won't have that problem.
Yeah. Now, but last but not the least, let's ask the mega question: when
Sure.
AI is going to solve the problems in biology, like the problem with drugs discovery for cancer and solving climate, and then when we talked about theoretical physics, the combining the quantum theory with general theory of relativity, what do you think?
Yeah.
Or this thing is going to help us in this regard in the mega trend, or it's just going to be language model generate content and misinformation, disinformation, things like that? Why when it's going to get real? I
Yeah.
means solving the humanity biggest challenges.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean, and you're thinking right. I mean, in terms of like when would we see that? And I've been often asked that question. The answer is a little bit fuzzy, and why it's intentionally there is because in terms of like, and there's some clarity on the answer as well. I mean, we're already discovering new proteins using large language models because it can spit out data, it can process data much, 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 much faster than a human brain, right? And what's basically holding back is the intensive compute because even though we have GPUs, which is bringing us closer to the art of the possible, it still takes a lot of power to compute that, right? Now, to your point, when would the sort of the call it like the big moment's going to happen, it has to do with two answers. One is when you start to see the quantum computing becoming mainstream, you'll start to see the impact of that. Why is because that unlocks the computational power that these models need to compute. The other answer is we're already discovering, as I mentioned earlier, as new proteins. We're already doing cancer studies. There's things already done. There's actually articles that you can read up on where the generative AI, well, not I would go where the large language models or neural networks were used to study those, right? Back in 70, I come from military background. We were using some of the algorithms to do these studies. So we already have the technology. It's just the computational power wasn't there because it's a lot more compute intensive, it's a lot more power intensive. But as we get closer to the quantum realm of things, when we get into the quantum computing, the art lies there. And the other thing, to your point, right, in solving complex problems, like weather analytics is a complex problem. I worked for a DoD project where we used to hoard about 2 terabytes of data per week just on the data, just on the weather. And that's just understatement because we had a petabyte worth of data that we were collecting. The problem is we have all of this data, and they used to plan the missions around the hazardous zones because of the data, right? Because of the weather. So for us to compute that and to figure out what the optimal flying sort of planes or routes are, we had to have a strong machine that could actually compute that, and we didn't. So we were used to feed in chunks. But the problem is when you feed in chunks, where do you delineate that this is how much I need to put in and then start from data set B and C and D? But more so, the problem is when you chunk it out, you get that sort of fragmented analysis, which you then have to put together to say what makes the right sense. The reason I mention that is as we're coming into the GPU world, that problem is almost disappearing because now you have more compute power. Now, the only challenge is again, is the power consumption. With the quantum, you're going to have the compute and you're going to have less power. And that is where lies the problem of solving the world hunger. That's what the scientists are
Yeah.
talking about. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Nasir, thank you very much. It was very insightful, grounded, and very fascinating. And yeah, we hope to see you quite oftenly interacting with these youngsters and kids. And since I have recorded this session, I'm going to send it to all the schools and colleges which are under the Aga Khan education network here in Pakistan. So thanks for your time and thanks for doing it. It was lovely seeing you, and yeah, hope to see you again.
No, it's a pleasure to be here. It was again, I always love and encourage people to have more lively sessions. And as a just closing remark for people that are on the call, and those that are going to listen to this, by all means, reach out to me for any internships that you guys want to do. Most because it's a startup, but I mean, I can give you guys certificates. I can give you guys some sort of support. You all are my brothers sitting in Pakistan and elsewhere, and I always love helping people. That's my passion. So if you're looking for internship or looking for innovation path and you want to do something with AxeGenAI, reach out to me. I'm always looking for innovative ideas, and if we can collaborate on this, be great. If not, I'm always here. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can find that information, or you can, email me on info@axegen.ai. Happy to answer any question. But it's a pleasure to be here. It's glad that I see a lot of interaction. And Dinar, you've been a great host. I appreciate you.
Thank you very much. We'll surely get in touch with you, and obviously, this is what is the cry of the hour. So we have to help each other, and then while
Yes,
doing that, we have to create value. So thank you very much for being gracious, and thanks for your time.
you got it. Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of the night and a good weekend.
Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Bye
Bye
bye.
bye.
Take
Bye bye.
care. Take care.